Boomerangs, bombs, dungeons, magic swords, puzzles, and green tunics. Welcome to The Legend of Zelda. With 20 years of hit titles under its belt, the Legend of Zelda franchise has earned its right to be one of the most popular, influential, and critically acclaimed entities in all of video games. Selling over 47 million units, its familiar characters have become some of Nintendo's biggest icons. Created by Shigeru Miyamoto and inspired by his childhood, wandering the nearby forests of his hometown Kyoto, The Legend of Zelda made its debut in 1987 on the Nintendo Entertainment System. 8-bit gamers were introduced to the young Link, a quiet boy in a green tunic who set out on what would become a never-ending quest to rescue a princess named Zelda. Unlike other games of its day, The Legend of Zelda dropped you in the middle of a gigantic world that was open to explore. From an overhead view, you ventured through the fantastical realm of Hyrule, with no direction or guide. This unconventional structure made The Legend of Zelda one of the first free-roaming games ever created. It was up to you to decide where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do. You could journey into dungeons out of order. Some could only be reached with certain items like the raft, or would be extremely difficult to navigate with only 3 hearts and no bow, but it was up to you to make those choices. Luckily, the Nintendo Fun Club newsletter released a map of the overworld. While it outlined the land of Hyrule screen by screen, giving the players a sense of direction, it didn't take away from the sheer size of the game or its difficulty. The Legend of Zelda pioneered an advanced inventory system and introduced the ability to store dozens of different items used to solve puzzles or battle creatures in real time. Zelda was also the first console game to give players the ability to save their progress via battery-backed memory. This feature alone was a clear sign that the game could not be beaten in a couple of hours. It was one of the largest adventures to date, and held that title for some time afterward. After you explored all of Hyrule, found the magic sword, beat all the dungeons, collected the pieces of the Triforce, defeated the evil Ganon, and rescued Princess Zelda, you had basically beaten the game. But the artist behind Nintendo's first RPG went above and beyond, adding a second quest. Instead of requiring you to play the same game twice, it slightly altered the overworld and dungeons to make them even more challenging. Not only did Zelda's gameplay set new standards for the genre, but its music was unlike anything anyone had heard before on the NES. 2 decades later, it's still one of the most recognizable music cues in all of video games. Even other Nintendo titles like Mario and Metroid have lost their inaugural themes over time, but every Zelda adventure ever made has featured this trademark anthem. All of these polished elements came together in a divine synthesis that can only be rivaled by the joining of the almighty Triforce. The original Legend of Zelda has been copied and imitated time and time again, but few have succeeded in making a game of its caliber, or spawning a franchise as emotionally revered. The following year, Nintendo released Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link. It's still the only game in the series to drop the Legend of Zelda title, and the only numeric sequel. Zelda 2 was a vastly different experience. It introduced more role-playing elements like experience points, and swapped the overhead view for a side-scrolling perspective. There were no rupees to collect either, which makes it unlike any Zelda game other than Four Swords Adventures. Zelda 2 was extremely difficult, largely due to the fact that you only had 3 lives, and once those were gone, you had to start all the way back at the tomb of the sleeping princess. The action-based platformer was not what a lot of fans were expecting, but then again, no Zelda game ever is. While considered the black sheep of the franchise due to its fundamental differences, Zelda 2 still introduced many groundbreaking elements that have stayed in the series. The Adventure of Link was the first time our young hero used magic, if his brand new magic meter was full, that is. The 8-bit sequel introduced the hammer, which would remain a necessary tool for Link to use against seemingly immovable objects. Zelda 2 also featured a highly advanced combat system, which created more dynamic battles with armed enemies. You had to outmaneuver their shields to land each strike while trying to block their high and low attacks. Even the non-playable characters were presented in a different fashion. Instead of standing still, hiding in a secret cave waiting to be found, they roamed the streets of their individual towns, wandered in and out of their houses, and played a much more important role in Link's adventure. Grand Theft Auto might have shocked the masses when it replenished your health for sleeping with strangers, but Link was apparently getting lucky 13 years earlier. The Legend of Zelda and Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link were two of the most popular games on Nintendo's entertainment system. They solidified Link as one of Nintendo's go-to heroes, and spawned toys, breakfast cereals, and even a televised cartoon.
Well, excuse me, princess.
Be sure to catch part 2 of our Legend of Zelda retrospective as we take a look at Zelda on the next-gen console, the Super Nintendo, and go handheld on the Game Boy for Link's Awakening. Boomerangs, bombs, dungeons, magic swords, puzzles, and green tunics. Welcome to The Legend of Zelda. After Nintendo had players around the world placing the Japanese 8-bit home entertainment system next to their VHS and cassette players in the mid to late 1980s, a new decade began, and with it, a new era in video games. Nintendo's next-gen contribution to the American market was the Super Nintendo in 1991. The system launched Nintendo's legacy of reinventing their franchises for a new generation, a technological leap that still captivates our imaginations today. The advanced system meant a new free-roaming kingdom of possibilities, and an updated continuation of Link's adventure was at the forefront of every Nintendo fan's mind. 1 year later, in 1992, the gallant sprite set out to destroy all 16 bits of evil in The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. Years after the side-scrolling Zelda 2, Nintendo returned the series to an overhead perspective, one that added exquisite detail and a bright polish to the original adventure. The gameplay also seemed gleefully familiar, as you explored the overworld of Hyrule, slashing your way through each grid-locked environment. Your health meter was once again a row of hearts that could now be expanded by finding quarter pieces across the world map. Combining 4 of these would give you another vessel of life, enticing players to explore every nook and cranny in every area to raise their defense. The sequel once again pitted our trusted hero Link against the evil Ganon. Just when you thought you had caught up to him and Zelda was within your grasp, you learned that your eternal nemesis had been sealed away in an alternate dimension known as the Sacred Realm. This parallel universe mirrored Hyrule, but Ganon's evil powers had turned it into a horrible place. Link had to travel back and forth between these two worlds, making the game twice as big as expected, and introducing numerous realm-crossing brain teasers. This mission structure was so successful, it became a major part in several Zelda sequels and other Nintendo franchise releases to follow. Link apparently used his time away from consoles to work out a little bit, because he was much more flexible in the third installment. He could move diagonally, which doubled the directional possibilities, and he could pick up items for moving and throwing. When he was on his guard, he now had the "how did I ever survive without that" ability to attack sideways. Instead of only thrusting his sword forward, Link could stand up against multiple enemies with a move that evolved into a mainstay for future games. A Link to the Past also introduced new items, as fans had come to expect. These included the hook shot for grappling, Pegasus boots for dashing, and the Master Sword, the beloved blade of power that would become the Little Green Warrior's Excalibur. One innovation that added a new level to dungeon exploring, literally, was the addition of an upstairs or downstairs to most of the castles and underground interiors. Link could travel up and down each floor, often finding himself on the same screen twice as he took the high-low road back and forth. He would even fall through floors unexpectedly. This feature not only returned in numerous overhead sequels, but it was an interesting development that would one day become a full 3D experience on the N64. After scaring a few loyal followers with Zelda 2, A Link to the Past was everything they dreamed a true Zelda sequel could be, and more. The bird's eye view returned, letting you view each room, town, forest, and enemy battle in its entirety. The combat was smoother, the environments were bigger, the graphics were prettier, and an arsenal of new items made finding each weapon a triumphant achievement. Needless to say, the game was a smash hit. Adored by fans and critics, A Link to the Past held Nintendo Power's #1 spot on the top games list for over 5 consecutive years. Before Nintendo set to outdo themselves again, they moved the series to their first handheld device, the black and white Game Boy. It was not the first RPG to appear on the Pocket system, but it did give the developers license to move the series into unexpected directions in The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. While sailing back to Hyrule after training abroad, Link was caught in a storm and shipwrecked on Koholint Island. The only way our hero could return home was by snapping the Windfish out of his never-ending slumber. Link's Awakening was the first Zelda game to be set outside of Hyrule, and the main Triforce storyline. Princess Zelda was only mentioned at the beginning, and subsequently stepped out of the spotlight as your primary objective. The on-the-go adventure was the first of the top-view games to feature jumping, a talent Link's cousin Mario had been perfecting for 12 years. This tossed platforming elements into the growing gameplay modes, and added another ability that would become vital when the camera eventually dropped down into the third dimension 5 years later. Link's Awakening was also the first in the franchise that allowed you to assign both buttons to different items, and neither had to be your sword. This opened up new puzzle possibilities like having to dash with the Pegasus boots and jump with Rock's feather. Side quests weren't something that Link hadn't seen before, as there was always much more to do in each Zelda game than you were required to, but the Game Boy exclusive introduced the first trading sequence. This involved meeting several NPCs and traveling to multiple scattered locations to unlock a bonus item. And it continued to beckon true adventurers, itching to find all there was to find on each map in the years and games to follow. Link's Awakening also had an unexpected comedic edge by being surprisingly self-aware. Characters would inform you how to save your game, and then explain that they had no idea what that meant. One character you met introduced himself, and then told you he'd be lost in the forest later on and asked you to keep an eye out for him. To go along with its goofball humor, the Game Boy release featured an uncanny amount of Mario character cameos. From Goombas to Chain Chomps to a Yoshi doll or a picture of Princess Peach, the fourth Zelda title was littered with famous Nintendo faces. And while some fans were shaken by the absence of color in the Zelda universe, the monochrome original returned in a DX version for the Game Boy Color in 1998. Like the console quest before it, Link's Awakening not only introduced new traveling tools that would become indispensable, it inspired future handheld ventures, like the dual cartridge Oracle of Seasons and Ages and the Minish Cap for the Game Boy Advance. It was also the first time Nintendo goers could take Link on the road thanks to the Game Boy's remarkable battery life. Considering how much there was to collect and conquer in each Zelda title, it made it that much more tempting to play when the device was tucked away in your backpack, front pocket, or custom carrying case. We're nearing our halfway point in our journey through the history of Hyrule. Keep your battle camera locked onto Part 3 of our Legend of Zelda retrospective as we explore Link's trek into the third dimension on the Nintendo 64. It was there that he starred in what many consider to be the best in the series, and one of the finest video games ever made, the Ocarina of Time, as well as its controversial time-traveling follow-up, Majora's Mask. boomerangs, bombs, dungeons, magic swords, puzzles, and green tunics. Welcome to The Legend of Zelda. While the late 80s and early 90s were quite good to Link, the mid-90s were like Ganon's sacred realm for Zelda fans, empty and miserable. Nintendo was busy developing a CD-ROM add-on for the Super Nintendo with Sony, but soon broke the contract to join with Philips. Sony went on to create the PlayStation, and Nintendo eventually dropped the add-on project altogether. However, while partnering with Philips, Nintendo let them borrow the rights to the characters Link, Zelda, and Ganon. Philips went on to create its own CDI console and used its ticket to Hyrule to make 3 Zelda games: Link, The Faces of Evil, Zelda, The Wand of Gamelon, and Zelda's Adventures. Released throughout 1993 and 1994, these games were an absolute joke. Nintendo took no part in developing them, and most fans wish they had never been made. Time slowly crept by for Nintendo fans as they crossed their fingers for Link's true return. It was clear that the industry would have to move into 3D, and everyone's favorite franchise friends would be forced to go with it. This was exciting, but given the unpredictable nature of the Zelda franchise, no one knew what to expect. When the Nintendo 64 was released in 1996, Mario's first appearance in 3D gave gamers a taste of the incredible adventure to come. 2 years later, that quest was dubbed the Ocarina of Time. Pre-ordering the 5th installment in the series guaranteed you a gold-colored cartridge and a chance to experience the future of action role-playing. The moment gamers stepped out onto the main field and saw the sun slowly rise over Hyrule Castle, they knew Link's world would never be the same. While it felt like a completely new gameplay experience at first, longtime fans soon realized it was essentially the same game, but from a thrilling new perspective. All of the 2D elements were there. Hyrule was a massive open world, each town was full of NPCs for shopping and questing, and each dungeon was packed with hidden treasures and dangerous enemies. It was a formula Nintendo had been perfecting for over a decade, and it was an indescribable joy to see it play out in third and first person. Players had to rediscover and relearn the boomerang, the bow, and hookshot, as well as wield the Master Sword with unprecedented precision. Ocarina of Time introduced a revolutionary lock-on targeting system that meant no more aimless bow casting or sword swinging. Your faithful fairy, Navi, guided you through this new mode of combat by telling you where to look and describing things once you selected them. This new way to play became essential when your adventure introduced you to shielded and sword-wielding enemies, as well as several larger-than-life bosses with hidden sweet spots. Your updated arsenal was not complete without a few new entries, like the hidden passage-finding Lens of Truth and the ability to enchant your arrows with fire, ice, or light. Having already made a fashion statement with his signature green getup, Link could now try on a red tunic for fire protection and a blue tunic for breathing underwater. His ensemble could be further customized with boots for sinking into the abyss or gliding on air, a shield for reflecting light sources, and a giant sword that could not be broken. All of these were hidden somewhere in the game. But one of the biggest additions was revealed the moment you booted up Ocarina of Time. In the middle of the world map was Lon Lon Ranch, and trapped within its gates was a trusty companion that would become Link's inseparable pal. After a couple of trips around the track and a triumphant leap over the wall, the horse Epona was yours to ride. She would come when called, leap when able, and free Link up to use his bow and arrow while racing across the open countryside. The most significant enhancement, and one that was pivotal to the core of the storyline, was the ocarina itself. Legendary composer Koji Kondo returned to the Zelda series for the 4th time to score the N64 adventure, composing 10 unique themes that could be manually played by the players themselves. As Link encountered pivotal story characters, they passed down their knowledge in the form of a quick tune you could tap out using the yellow directional buttons. These infectious ditties served as the backbone for the game's brilliant musical score. While these tunes helped Link open doors, turn day into night, and even transport himself across the world map, uncovering the Master Sword led to the game's biggest surprise. After pulling the blade from its resting place, Link was trapped in a dimension that catapulted him right through puberty into adulthood. This plot shift changed everything from the weapons he could use, to the moves he could perform, to the places he could go. But no location he rediscovered in this apocalyptic future was the way he left it. In the time Link was gone, Ganon had cast his evil shadow over the land and tainted all who lived there, similar to his nefarious deeds in A Link to the Past. While Link could eventually travel back to the time he remembered, he would have to face off against an oversized future Ganon to stop him once and for all. While many expected the next Zelda title from Nintendo to exceed everyone's expectations, Ocarina of Time was truly a masterpiece. The graphics might not have been on a PlayStation performance level, and the water temple was absolute torture, but the balance in between all the quests the game had to offer was eternally gratifying. It remains one of the finest achievements in gaming. So how do you top that? Following the endless critical success of the Ocarina of Time, including numerous perfect scores and Game of the Year nods from major gaming publications, Nintendo decided to guide the Zelda series through another sharp turn, one that a lot of fans found unsettling. 2 years later, Nintendo once again took Link out of Hyrule on another doomed vacation, and charged him with saving the time-trapped town of Termina in Majora's Mask. From the very beginning, fans were stripped of everything they had grown to love. Navi was missing, Epona was stolen, even the Ocarina itself was ripped from Link's hands. To make matters worse, the evil Skull Kid turned Link into a Deku scrub, forcing players to get used to the game's biggest development. The sequel was all about masks, and the hidden power some of them possessed to transform Link into one of 3 different creatures: the aforementioned pedal-piloting Deku, a boulder-rolling Goron, and a wave-riding Zora. All of these races appeared in Ocarina of Time and other previous Zelda titles, but this was the first time Link could see through their eyes and use their unique abilities. Some of the dungeons required you to switch back and forth between them on the fly, creating puzzle opportunities even the Zelda Elite had never seen before. Ocarina also featured masks, but you could only carry a few at a time, where Majora had an inventory of 24 slots you filled in as you ventured on. These transformations seem to replace Link's ability to become his older self, a detail some fans sorely missed. While there was no way for Link to travel into the future, he could eventually drop 3 days into the past again and again, a cycle that became Majora's unique method of storytelling. Playing by the clock meant you had a little extra pressure to complete your objectives, because if the cycle was left to finish, Clock Town and the world around it would be destroyed by the evil moon looming over the land. Those that were patient enough to relive the same 3 days over and over began to notice the subtle differences between Majora and Ocarina. While the Hyrule map in Ocarina was larger than the Termina map in Majora, Termina was much more detailed. NPCs weren't glued to the ground or aimlessly running around. They had a schedule, a purpose, and a story to tell if you dug deep enough. After you learned one character's secret, it added a twinge of familiarity when you saw them walking the same path again and again. This also replaced the dimension-swapping gameplay that permeated the other Zelda titles. A Link to the Past and Ocarina of Time both featured dueling dimensions that you had to travel between several times. Termina was one big map and one huge world to save. You just had so many days to see it all. While Termina was not Hyrule by any means, it did share certain similarities. It was this fish-out-of-water feeling that made some fans uncomfortable. Lots of loyal Zelda followers were disappointed the sequel strayed so far from the formula, especially after Ocarina of Time had almost perfected it. This is easy to think if you consider Majora's Mask a standalone sequel. As far as the story is concerned, it branches off into very bizarre and dark territory. While the subject matter suggested a more somber tone, the game seemed to be primarily about healing. All of your masked compatriots had their own custom healing song, and your objectives involved curing the land from the conditions that poisoned it. But from a gameplay perspective, the two Nintendo 64 titles complement each other beautifully. One brought the humongous land of Hyrule to life in 2 eras for the price of one, and the other sought to look closer at the world and the intricate characters living in it. Essentially, each one has what the other one doesn't, and many consider the sequel to be as exceptional as the original. As we travel onward through our tour of Zelda's lineage, we come upon Nintendo's most financially successful console of all time, the Game Boy, which allowed Link to redefine how handheld RPGs were made, with his color adventure too big to fit into one cartridge, the Oracle of Seasons and Ages, and the GameCube and Game Boy Advance multiplayer crossover, Four Swords Adventures. Boomerangs, bombs, dungeons, magic swords, puzzles, and green tunics. Welcome to The Legend of Zelda. While Nintendo has helped pioneer dozens of gaming conventions that still influence the industry today, one of their trademark tactics is to cross their properties across multiple platforms and peripherals. Sometimes this can lead to some superfluous purchases, but it can also introduce revolutionary ways to make an old formula feel like a completely new experience. After Link made his daring jump into the third dimension with 2 successful games for the Nintendo 64, Nintendo joined forces with Capcom to continue the fantasy franchise. Just months before they shipped their next home console, the GameCube, Nintendo added a true green to Link's tunic on the newly RGB upgraded Game Boy Color. Under the supervision of Miyamoto, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons were released on the same day in May of 2001. These dual handheld titles were originally going to be a part of the Triforce trilogy, where the 2 original NES games were to be revamped and included with one completely new game to finish off the acutely symmetrical package. This concept gradually evolved into an all-new trilogy-based project, where each game would represent a third of the Triforce. Unfortunately, it became extremely troublesome to link all 3 titles, using a brand new password system. Thus, this adventure set was pared down to only 2 games. Each would be able to stand on its own, but they could also be joined together by using passwords to transfer your progress. From a gameplay perspective, the 2 games also split the infamous Zelda formula right down the center. Oracle of Ages was primarily puzzle-based for the brain-teasing, labyrinth-exploring crowd, while Oracle of Seasons was more action-oriented for those who favored adventuring with the sword and bow. These quests were unique, but incomplete without the other if you wanted a true Zelda experience. And of course, the true ending to both games. Both the Oracle adventures started the same. On one of Link's frequent visits to the dimension-shifting, glistening gold relic in the Temple of the Triforce, presumably to make sure no one had stolen it again, he was voluntarily pulled into a portal that spit him out in either the world of Labrena or Holodrum. There, he met the Oracles, the singer Nehru or the dancer Den. Just as they introduced themselves to their unexpected guest, the General of Darkness, Onox, or the Sorceress of Shadows, Veron, kidnapped one of these newfound friends and threw their respective worlds off balance. Labrena's flow of time was disrupted, and Link would have to find the 8 essences of time to set it right again. To do this, he could travel 100 years into the past, and then back to the present, changing events and rewriting history as he made each trip back and forth. Holdrum's passage of seasons was adversely affected, and Link was required to wave a magic wand to alter the world between them, allowing him to access different areas. Holdrum's map was bigger than Labrena, but the Ages world was doubled up due to the alternate time periods. Fans could either choose the playstyle they preferred from 2 technically similar but thematically different journeys to Hyrule and beyond, or combine them for one of the most elaborate quests Link's ever quested. While they may be the 2 least played games in the franchise, they shared all the elements from their predecessors that make the series continuously impressive. 1 year later, Nintendo ported A Link to the Past to the Game Boy Advance, with a few cosmetic changes. Along with the SNES Classic, the cartridge also featured, for the first time ever, a multiplayer Zelda game, entitled Four Swords. While the game might have been thought of as just a bonus feature, it was a solid Zelda game. However, finding 3 friends with GBA to GBA adapters and copies of the game was another story. Luckily, in 2004, Nintendo released the Four Swords Adventures for the GameCube. The new version allowed one lone gamer to control all 4 little links by snapping them into one of 4 battle formations. The game was much more linear than any Zelda title before it, with no connecting overworld. It was clearly built as a party game or cooperative quest. Similar to how the Oracle twins did a cartridge crossover, Four Swords was designed to transfer data, this time between consoles, via a GameCube to GBA cable. A single player could complete the adventure with just a GameCube controller, but once another player jumped in, everyone needed their own Game Boy Advance to come along. Your perspective would shift from the TV to the handheld in dungeons, caves, houses, and other interiors. Four Swords also marked the return of Dark Link, a doppelganger the good Link faced in Zelda 2 and Ocarina. Had adorable cartoon animation, several head-scratching zone-swapping puzzles, and a top-down perspective with polished lighting, characters, backgrounds, and special effects. Technically, it was the closest thing to a true Link to the Past sequel fans had seen since 1992. While these games might not have been as commercially successful as their gold-plated predecessors, they showcased Nintendo's willingness to try new things and experiment with their technology. Stay tuned as we follow Link's journey back to consoles with a brand new, unexpected look in The Wind Waker, and the penultimate example of Link's handheld prowess, the Minish Cap. Boomerangs, bombs, dungeons, magic swords, puzzles, and green tunics. Welcome to The Legend of Zelda. In August of 2000, at the Space World Expo, Nintendo unveiled the GameCube for the first time. One of the demonstrations being shown was a battle between Ganon and Link, similar in appearance to the old Link and Ganondorf from Ocarina of Time. The brief technical tease lasted barely a minute, but its impact lingered for a full year. Fans could only speculate at what Miyamoto might have in store for the 4th generation of Zelda. Their wildest dreams were way off. The following year, Nintendo introduced gamers to a Link they definitely didn't recognize. It was quite a shock, and a move some longtime denizens of Hyrule felt was entirely in the wrong direction. Making his 10th video game appearance, the new Link was perhaps the youngest version of the adolescent hero that had ever been created. Miyamoto defended the decision to make a Zelda game for all ages, and redesigned the land of Hyrule to look like an interactive cartoon. From the sequel's first impressions, a lot of critics and gamers expressed serious doubts, especially since Sony was about to release the PlayStation 2, and Microsoft was well on their way to creating their first home console. Most of those reservations were put to rest when The Wind Waker was released in March of 2003. The ironic thing about the new art design was that it was initially criticized as failing to give the Zelda series the next-gen detail and expression they felt it deserved, when the Link in Wind Waker is arguably one of the most expressive video game heroes ever conceived. From his subtle eye movements to his jubilant exultations, he's also one of the cutest characters as well. To this day, few games have achieved this caliber of cel-shaded animation. The story took place hundreds of years after the Ocarina of Time. Hyrule now lay at the bottom of a deep ocean called the Great Sea. Legends of a boy in a green tunic, a buried gold relic, and an unnamed evil were passed down across the ages, vaguely explaining how the ancient land had been covered in water. To help instill the courage of the hero of time in their children, and continue their dream of his inevitable return, parents dressed their kids in green garb when they were old enough to begin their own adventures. Once Link got his emerald cloak and cap, he spotted his first damsel in distress, a pirate captain named Tetra. After the Helmarok King dropped her into the forest, Link discovered Tetra and her salty crew. But upon returning to the village, the giant bird reappeared and kidnapped Link's sister, Errol. With no choice but to travel to the Forsaken Fortress and rescue her, Link boarded Tetra's ship, set sail on the open ocean, and said goodbye to his home. The following breaking and entering sequence was the first time Link was forced to use stealth. You were always free to evade or avoid certain enemies, but this stony searchlight-smothered stronghold turned Link into Solid Snake, with tights. He could pick up barrels and wear them as he tiptoed around, a strategy that was available to you throughout the rest of the game. After the rescue attempt went awry, Link was tossed out to sea and left for dead. Thankfully, he was saved by the King of Red Lions, a one-man sailing ship that gave plenty of wisdom and encouragement to the aspiring adventurer. Once you ran into town and picked up a sail, you could set out to rediscover Hyrule once again, even if most of it was hidden beneath the surface. On the way to Dragon Roost Island, players soon realized the unexpected power of producing environments so boldly beautiful, but technically simplified. It meant that unless you were visiting a major island for the first time, or entering a cave or dungeon, there were no loading times to break up the exploration, and draw distances that had to be seen to be believed. Cruising from one island to another was an astonishingly seamless experience, and the vast ocean was not only the biggest Hyrule ever produced, but one of the largest open game worlds players have had the privilege to explore. Unfortunately, the Red Lion was not a motorboat. With no self-propulsion, Link was completely reliant on the way of the winds. He had to go where they were going, and to swing the directional draft in his favor, he had to learn a brand new instrument. With the titular Wind Waker, Link could command the skies like he was conducting a symphony orchestra. The sheet music layout was similar to the Ocarina's playlist, but you could now change the tempo. The first leg of the Seafaring quest charged Link with recovering 3 pearls. He then transported them to the Triangle Islands, revived the Tower of the Gods, and defeated the boss Godan to prove his worth. This revealed a beam of light that warped Link and the Red Lion King miles beneath sea level to the frozen ruins of Hyrule. Trapped in time, the castle was the final resting place of the Master Sword, and the palace, along with all the enemies within it, sprang to life once Link took the blade into his hands. With his familiar weapon, Link could now perfect Wind Waker's additions to the tried and true 3D combat system. You could still lock on and strafe around targets with ease, but the larger shielded characters would give off a signal when they were preparing to launch a heavy attack. When this happened, players could parry that advance, dashing around the enemy and attacking from behind. This gave you one more way to save your skin, and was necessary to free some of the larger characters of their armor. After fighting his way back to the surface, Link soon realized that Ganon still lived. Tetra was actually Princess Zelda, and the King of Red Lions was really the King of Hyrule, who hadn't appeared in a Zelda title since A Link to the Past. He helped Zelda form her Golden Wisdom Piece, informed Link of Ganon's villainous but predictable plan to steal the Triforce, and tasked the young lad from Outset Island to restore power to the depleted Master Sword, unravel 8 nautical charts, slowly revealing the location of the Triforce of Courage, and face Ganon once again. Upon giving Ganon another splitting headache, Hyrule finally succumbed to the pressure of the Great Sea. As Link and Zelda ascended to the surface, the King, Ganon, and the kingdom players had explored for almost 20 years disappeared beneath a torrential tidal wave. These events lead directly into the upcoming Phantom Hourglass for the Nintendo DS. Those who persisted through Link's first GameCube adventure had to stop at least once and marvel at its magnificence. Despite its relatively tame difficulty level, the sheer size of the world and the quest was enough to make the most dedicated fan sigh with exhaustion. The Wind Waker proved that each Zelda adventure will be far from what you expect, while showcasing hours of careful design and years of technical experience. After the Wind Waker, the Nintendo faithful knew they would have to wait a while for the next epic console journey through Hyrule, or wherever Link would find himself next. This time of darkness created another opportunity to release a handheld excursion into uncharted territory. Handheld technology is usually a generation or two behind the consoles, so the Game Boy Advance was able to generate environments similar to the Super Nintendo. Adding several layers of depth to the detailed sprite design from A Link to the Past, the Minish Cap was released in the beginning of 2005. Every 100 years, the Pickery, or the Minish as they like to call themselves, return to Hyrule and grant humans with magical gifts to commemorate the time when they saved the kingdom from imminent destruction. A Pickery festival is held to celebrate their arrival, along with a sword fighting competition. But when the victor Vaati receives his prize, the Pickery sword, he destroys it and turns Princess Zelda into stone. The king and his royal counselor turn to Link, son of the local blacksmith, to bring her back to life. Like all the other portable Zelda journeys, the Minish Cap showed gamers a side of Link's hometown they had never seen before. Your perspective allowed you to look underneath the surface of Hyrule and discover each Minish environment. This miniature race was widely thought to be a fairy tale, but Link could witness the proof of their existence firsthand by shrinking himself at one of several Minish altars. The crafty little critters loved to hide things under objects, which explained why Link's been known to find random treasures underneath rocks or patches of green grass in each game. Near the beginning of the quest, Link was introduced to Ezlo, a bird-like creature closely resembling Link's green cap. Ezlo helped reduce Link's stature so that he could head out on his mission of microscopic proportions. The trials ahead included collecting and assembling multicolored kinstones, and discovering the 4 quarters of the broken Pickery sword to restore it to full 4-sword strength. Ezlo eventually revealed that he was Vaati's mentor, and they were both once Minish. Vaati stole one of Ezlo's wish-granting caps, transforming himself into a mighty sorcerer. He then morphed Ezlo into his current state and became drunk with power. Link's fight to save the Light Force led him through the tiniest cracks and biggest dungeons in Hyrule, through an Alice in Wonderland tale that only the action RPG wizards at Nintendo could realize. Vaati was eventually destroyed, Hyrule was saved, and the doorway to the Minish world was closed. This ended the last Link adventure ever created. No Zelda title has been released in almost 2 years. Join us next week for a complete tour through the lineage of The Legend of Zelda, and the conclusion to our 6-part retrospective. In the final installment, we'll follow each game chronologically through the history of Hyrule, shedding light on the hidden connections between each title and taking in one of the most successful video game series of all time, from start to finish. Boomerangs, bombs, dungeons, magic swords, puzzles, and green tunics. Welcome to The Legend of Zelda. Warning: when discussing the history of Hyrule, very little can be considered absolute. Nintendo has yet to release an actual timeline of the events that take place within each Zelda title and how they connect. The following segment is our theory of how each game fits into Nintendo's grand scheme, if there even is one. We're not saying that this is the absolute answer, but our findings will hopefully open up a few ideas about Hyrule's past you may have never thought of before. Hyrule was created by 3 goddesses, Din, Nehru, and Foror. Once they created the fantasy world, they left it. All that remained in their wake was the Triforce, and the void that was created in the spot where they crossed dimensions. This became known as the Sacred Realm, or Golden Land to the inhabitants of Hyrule. All of this is told during a cutscene that plays partway through the Ocarina of Time. Several sages emerged out of the Hylian people. They constructed numerous temples, including the Temple of Time, and the Master Sword to protect the Triforce and the Sacred Realm. Before long, a war began amongst the races of Hyrule to find the Triforce, and it lasted for several ages. Eventually, the Minish grew sick of the never-ending conflict and created the Pickery sword. This weapon was given to Gustav, a soldier garbed in green, who used it to stop the Long War. Gustav was dubbed King of Hyrule, and the Pickery sword, or 4-sword, was placed in a pedestal. Every 100 years, a swordsmanship tournament would be held, and the winner would be permitted to touch the legendary blade. Most of this information was first revealed in the Minish Cap for the Game Boy Advance. A number of theories, including our own, consider Minish Cap to be the earliest game in the timeline. notions from the game itself support this. The opening speaks of the Picori giving their sword to the hero of men, not the hero of time. This turns out to be Gustav, who wore a green tunic but no hat. Our Link at the beginning of the story wears green but is hatless as well. Eslo, the malformed mage who catches a ride on Link's head throughout the adventure, crowns the lad with his own green cap once the wizard returns to his original form. Eslo says it suits Link, and the emerald cap would go on to become a staple of the heroes of Hyrule. The second game, which is similarly placed throughout multiple fan-created backstories, is the Ocarina of Time. It seems to feature the first appearance of Ganondorf, as the King of Hyrule doesn't seem to know about his evil intentions. Ganondorf was busy searching for the entrance to the Sacred Realm so that he could wield the power of the Triforce and rule Hyrule. But after years of finding nothing, he decided to trick the king into helping him. Every other Zelda title, except for Minish Cap and Majora's Mask, has mentioned Ganon in some way, shape, or form. If these adventures are chronological, Ocarina would have to be second in line. In 1998, Miyamoto also stated that the Ocarina of Time is the first story. This was about 6 years before the Minish Cap was released. After Ocarina, however, things get a little foggy. Majora's Mask obviously follows it, but after that, we've seen a surprising amount of variation. Some ideas end with the Wind Waker, and some with the original 8-bit games. The one we found to be the most compelling and confusing is the split timeline theory. It begins to drastically shift the legend directly after Ocarina of Time. The theory argues that 2 different Hyrules were created at the end of that game. You defeat Ganon as adult Link, and speak with adult Zelda afterwards. She wishes for Link to have a childhood, so she uses the Ocarina to send him back to before they met. This becomes Hyrule A, with Link and Zelda as children, before Ganon took over. Hyrule B is the world he left behind, where adult Zelda remained after Ganon had been defeated, and Link had been deleted. Meanwhile, in the past, young Link and young Zelda inform the king of Ganon's evil plans. Link then leaves Hyrule before the war breaks out, in search of Navi, who left him in the Temple of Time. This brings Link to Majora's Mask. After he saves Termina, Link attempts to return to Hyrule via the sea, but is shipwrecked, and begins the Game Boy adventure, Link's Awakening. Link's Awakening is rumored to be a dream. As it comes to a close, Link regains consciousness in the ocean, and the island has mysteriously disappeared. At the end, he battles a nightmare creature that takes the shape of Ganon. This reveals to him his deepest fear, inevitable future, or both. Link made his way back to Hyrule to discover that Ganon had won the war. Stripped of his equipment after being shipwrecked, Link had to collect his armor and weapons and stop Ganon a second time. This began the original Legend of Zelda for the NES. In Link's absence, the citizens of Hyrule moved north, which explains why the early overworld map didn't have any towns or castles. Ganon had eventually uncovered the Triforce of Power, and Zelda received the Triforce of Wisdom. Fearing Ganon would take her piece of the ancient relic, Zelda broke it into 8 pieces. Link eventually picked them all back up, destroyed Ganon, and became a hero once again. According to its manual, Zelda 2 takes place several seasons after Zelda 1. The sequel introduces Link to the actual Legend of Zelda, a tale many gamers have never heard before. A long time ago, the King of Hyrule's son learned about the Triforce and desired it greatly. An evil wizard informed the prince that his younger sister Zelda knew of its whereabouts. The two confronted Zelda, but when the princess refused to talk, the wizard forced her into a deep sleep. Overcome with power, the wizard died in the process, leaving the prince guilt-stricken over betraying his own blood. He had his sister moved to the North Castle altar and declared that every daughter born into the royal family shall be named Zelda. This event predates the Minish Cap, but occurs after the events of King Gustav. This clears up a bit of the confusion gamers feel when they keep encountering characters with the same name. Link learned all of this when he headed north to rediscover Hyrule in Zelda 2. The princess trapped in a deep sleep was none other than the original Zelda, placed there by her brother years before. Link hunted for the Triforce of Courage, prevented the return of Ganon, and pulled this original Princess Zelda from her eternal slumber. Soon after Zelda 2 is the Four Swords adventure, with either a new Link and Zelda, or the same duo that first met during the Ocarina of Time. It's clear the multiplayer journey takes place after the Minish Cap, because it begins with the villainous Vaati trapped within the Pickery Sword. But it definitely took place before A Link to the Past, because once he's revealed as Vaati's puppet master, Ganon acquires the Trident of Power, which he then uses on the Super Nintendo. A Link to the Past speaks of an evil that had been sealed away by the sages, which would lead one to assume that the Super Nintendo quest takes place during Hyrule B, the timeline that began once the sages had sealed the evil, and Zelda had been left behind in a world with a sealed Ganon and no Link. But one could also assume that young Link told the king of his adventure after he traveled back in time. This tale would have ended with Ganon being destroyed, and could have been passed down as a legend and not a historical account, despite Ganon eventually winning the war. In issue 165 of Nintendo Power, Eiji Onuma, who was the assistant director on Ocarina and directed Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Phantom Hourglass, said, "If you think back to the end of Ocarina of Time, there were two endings in that game in different time periods. First, Link defeated Ganon as an adult, and then he actually went back to being a child. You could say that the Wind Waker takes place 100 years after the ending in which Link was an adult. So the story that's retold at the beginning of Wind Waker explains what happened to Zelda and Hyrule after Link disappeared in time. Ganon found a way to escape his prison and still possessed the Triforce of Power. Zelda's descendant, Tetra, still carried the Triforce of Wisdom, but the new Link was forced to rediscover the Triforce of Courage." Let's take a broad look at the picture we're attempting to paint. Minish Cap first, Ocarina second, then the timeline splits. There's Hyrule A, with Link and Zelda as kids warning the king of Ganon's evil plans. And parallel to that, Hyrule B, with a sealed away Ganon, adult Zelda, and no Link. Hyrule A leads to Majora's Mask, Link's Awakening, Zelda 1, Zelda 2, Four Swords, and then A Link to the Past. Hyrule B leads to Wind Waker. But we're missing two games, Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons. These titles lend themselves to this split timeline theory best of all. They were released on the same day and begin pretty much the same way. Link goes to check on the Triforce via different routes, however. The theory speculates that these games are taking place at the exact same time, just in two different Hyrules. Both games begin with the Triforce in its resting place. The previous games for both timelines have presumably reset the Triforce. Both Ages and Seasons deal with someone trying to resurrect Ganon. Does this solidify the split timeline theory? We're gonna leave that up to you to decide. We're not sure which Game Boy Color adventure takes place in which timeline, but we've speculated that both games occur at the end of each, or at least the end of the story that's been told so far. That was fun, but we also have two brand new Zelda games coming out that could totally shatter this and all other theories. What we do know is that Phantom Hourglass takes place after Wind Waker. As long as the game doesn't resurrect Ganon or disturb the Triforce, it fits in this timeline with no problem, and we can't wait to get our hands on it. The real question is, where does Twilight Princess fit? And will it connect any of these dots? Apparently, it takes place between Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker, which would set it in Hyrule B. We have yet to play through the entire game, so plenty of questions still remain. It seems that a strange darkness is trying to consume Hyrule and Zelda. Could this darkness be trying to destroy the princess due to the split she caused by returning Link to his childhood? Or is it just Ganon trying to make his evil return? Will Hyrule ultimately be flooded in the end, giving birth to Wind Waker's Great Sea? The ending of Twilight Princess could dramatically disprove all of these ideas, but we were eager to collect them and assemble our theory of how Hyrule happened, especially after looking back at this groundbreaking franchise. Thanks for joining us on our 6-part retrospective on The Legend of Zelda. We look forward to discussing and debating multiple timelines and dimensions as Nintendo continues one of the greatest fantasy adventures of all time. As long as there's a Triforce, there will be a Zelda. As long as there's a prosperous kingdom, there will be an evil bent on destroying it. And as long as there's an oppressive force threatening Hyrule, there will be a boy in a green tunic, silver shield, and magic blade to stand against it. In the mid-80s, action games were becoming the industry's leading genre, with several releases that started new franchises that would live on for decades. Most of them involved laying on the lead until everyone who wasn't you was dead. Subtlety was not in a player's vocabulary. It was a formula that sold lots and lots of cartridges, providing little reason to change it, and it would take a brave visionary to break the mold. "23-year-old Hideo Kojima joined the MSX division of Konami in 1986. With his limited knowledge of programming, he was not the most adept employee. Kojima assistant-directed Penguin Adventure, the rousing sequel to 1983's Antarctic Adventure. He also wrote and directed an action platformer he dubbed Lost World, a title that combined the words war and world. Like many of Hideo's early ideas, World was tossed out by his superiors. Kojima's last chance to save his job was a war-inspired shoot-'em-up for the MSX2, the same computer line that introduced Konami's Bomberman in 1983. His pitch was initially hard for Konami executives to get excited about. Instead of having gamers charge forward, guns blazing, the game would encourage them to hide. It felt backwards, but Konami gambled on Kojima's vision and released Metal Gear on July 12, 1987. With just bare knuckles and a pack of smokes, players had to guide Foxhound Special Ops soldier Solid Snake through a heavily guarded installation called Outer Heaven, located 200 kilometers north of the fictional South African country of Galsburg. Snake's memorable visage on the game's box art was referenced directly from publicity photos of actor Michael Biehn in James Cameron's Terminator. Snake's mission was named Operation Intrude N313, following N312, an earlier botched attempt to infiltrate the compound by an operative known as Gray Fox. Gray's last communication contained only 2 words: Metal Gear. Taking commands from an officer called Big Boss, Snake had to break in, rescue Fox and other hostages, and uncover Outer Heaven's secret project. Sneaking or shooting past screen after screen, Snake could retrieve 7 weapons and 16 pieces of equipment, along with 8 levels of security pass cards. Items could help Snake breathe underwater, light up dark places, disguise himself as the enemy, hunt for landmines, or spy on adjacent screens. Some items magically regenerated after leaving the room, allowing Snake to keep coming and going if his stock needed replenishing. Unfortunately, the guards regenerated as well. If players navigated outside of an insurgent's direct line of sight, they could conserve ammunition. Gas-filled corridors, security cameras, breakaway traps, hidden doorways, electric floors, and infrared lasers also served as deterrents. And if an alarm was triggered, the base's defenses would rush the area. 1 exclamation mark above a guard's head meant you could slip away to safety on another screen, but if they flashed 2, you had to escape to another floor or clear the opposition. Bosses, on the other hand, like Shotmaker, Machine Gun Kid, Fire Trooper, and Dirty Duck, were unavoidable adversaries. Hostages relayed tips and useful intel once you untied them, and releasing 5 boosted your rank or class, increasing your maximum health and allowing you to carry more ammo. Discovering Gray Fox gave Snake his real objective: stopping Metal Gear. The walking tank was capable of launching a nuclear assault from any position on the planet, and it was moments away from becoming operational. The weapon's creator, Dr. Drago Petrovich Modnar, was also being held against his will, along with his daughter, Ellen. She was kidnapped to force the robotics engineer to build the bipedal mech. Unable to reach Metal Gear's hangar by himself, Snake received assistance via his radio transceiver by resistance fighters named Diane, Jennifer, and Schneider. They could be contacted, along with CO Big Boss, on a specific frequency that some characters changed in the course of the mission. Big Boss warned you of incoming hazards, Diane presented strategies for different bosses, Jennifer pointed you towards key items, and Schneider almost revealed the identity of Outer Heaven's leader before being cut off. Against all odds, Snake survived to face off against Metal Gear, using a strategy suggested by Dr. Petrovich. The tank's destruction began the base's self-destruct sequence, but the exit was blocked. Unmasking himself as the mastermind behind Outer Heaven, Big Boss appeared in person and confronted Snake. The boss planned to use Snake to keep US officials misinformed, in hopes the rookie would quickly fall into enemy hands. After a few strategically placed rockets, Snake proved he was up to the task. As the clock ticked down, the seemingly innocuous pack of cigarettes could be smoked to buy the player more time. Big Boss was beaten, Metal Gear was disabled, and Outer Heaven went up in smoke as Snake escaped on foot. Metal Gear on MSX2 garnered glowing reviews and a loyal following in Japan and Europe, and created the stealth genre as it's known today. This warm reception permitted it to be adjusted for American audiences on the Nintendo Entertainment System. The port, which launched in Japan 5 months later and in the US in June of '88, was not overseen by Kojima, and as a result, several revisions were made. On the MSX, Snake snuck into Outer Heaven grounds through an underwater passage, but on the NES, he dropped in via parachute. It appeared Snake was deployed with 3 other soldiers, but he never reunited with them while on the ground. These alternate insertion points altered the initial buildings and outdoor areas. The standoff with the Hind D helicopter was removed and twin turret gunners were put in its place. Enemy alarms could always be silenced by moving to the next screen. The rooftop flying army no longer hovered, Snake's mug was removed from the transceiver screens, and while Big Boss's post-credit transmission on the MSX2 proved he survived the destruction of Outer Heaven, he was presumed dead on the NES. The climactic battle with Metal Gear was also stripped away, instead forcing Snake to bomb a supercomputer that controlled the mega weapon's functions. Kojima was not pleased with the NES version of Metal Gear, stating that the game was too challenging for the wrong reasons. English-speaking gamers also cited numerous spelling snafus, 2 occurring within minutes of starting up the game. Broken grammar and developer concerns had no effect on sales, however, as Metal Gear sold over 1 million copies in North America. The game was again reconfigured for the PC and Commodore 64 in 1990, mobile phones in 2004, the GameCube for the Japanese version of Twin Snakes the same year, and the PS2 for Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence in 2005. Kojima's sneaky idea was a hit on both coasts, but the NES won the popularity contest. Ultra Games, the same publisher responsible for Skate or Die and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, got the go-ahead to create an NES-exclusive sequel to Metal Gear. Having never thought of a sequel to his breakout game, Hideo Kojima was again not involved in the development process. Snake not only came back in 1990, he sought revenge. Snake's revenge arrived in April and took place 3 years after the incursion of Outer Heaven. A hostile nation that was never disclosed had apparently received the plans for Metal Gear and was mass-producing the WMDs. Operation 747 sent Snake, along with operatives John Turner and Nick Meyer, to again destroy all traces of the secret project. Without Big Boss to back him up, Snake stayed in contact with an unnamed helicopter pilot and returning double agent Jennifer. Snake's transceiver was simplified from the manual frequency input method of the first game. Each contact's face appeared for the first time on the dialogue screen, and the limited list of associates was easily selectable. The radio also had a functioning radar that detected an ally's transmission, but the feature was only required a few times during the course of the mission. Snake ditched his green camouflage for a bright orange jumpsuit. It contrasted just about every environment he explored, making it a questionable fashion choice. But the Foxhound soldier did have an edge the second time around by starting the mission equipped with a pistol and a knife for close-range, one-hit kills. The newly added power armor bulked Snake up for moving heavy objects, and truth gas allowed Snake to question officers for vital hints. Doing so advanced his rank, along with rescuing hostages like before. The shotgun and flare gun were added to the arsenal, but the gas mask, cardboard box, and life-saving cigarettes were removed from Snake's equipment. The most glaring change in gameplay was the inclusion of underground, side-scrolling levels, similar to the view the original game had when using an elevator. These gave Snake the ability to duck and crawl, but most fans wished they hadn't been included. Given that the draw of Metal Gear was finding ways to avoid confrontation, these areas didn't fit the franchise because they forced you to take out every soldier in your path. While the game was riddled with these frustrating interludes, the sequel's environmental diversity was a clear improvement. The road to Metal Gear 2 cut through a forest, a cargo ship, a moving train, a desert base, military buildings connected by a trolley, and a fortified castle. The ready and waiting bosses included a scrimmage line of armored football players, a trio of grenadiers, a bridge-defending tank, and your supposed comrade, John. Snake decommissioned Turner the Spy and discovered Nick dying from fatal wounds. Nick revealed that not only was Jennifer a spy as well, but the entire plan was hatched by the very much alive Big Boss. Kept alive by a cyborg skeletal structure that was oddly bigger than his fleshy exterior, Snake's former CO had to be lured away from the safety of his lair and barraged with landmines that could damage Big Boss's only weak point, the bottom of his feet. Despite her traitorous actions, Snake rescued Jennifer, who pointed him in the direction of Metal Gear 2. Cut off from the machine, Snake had to reroute guided missiles through an air duct, with the launch clock rapidly ticking down. 15 direct hits later, Metal Gear 2 was history, and so was Operation 747. John Turner was deemed MIA, and his record was erased from the Navy archives. Nick Myers was congratulated posthumously by being promoted 3 ranks. Snake's Revenge was, for all US gamers knew, the sequel to 1987's Metal Gear. It had more areas, more weapons, and was a longer operation overall. But even the crew working on it didn't consider it a true continuation of Kojima's groundbreaking work. They were just building on a great idea. In the late 80s, Kojima wrote and directed a cyberpunk adventure called Snatcher, and had put Metal Gear behind him when he bumped into a Snake's Revenge developer on a train in Tokyo. With the eager fans' encouragement, Kojima agreed to continue the series, and the very next day was working on Snake's official return. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake debuted on the MSX2 on July 19, 1990. Hideo invented the Central Asia province of Zanzibar land to set the stage for Operation Intrude F-014. Snake had left Foxhound following N313, and after briefly working for the CIA, he retired into the Canadian wilderness. Foxhound's new leader, Roy Campbell, asked for Snake's assistance in rescuing a scientist pivotal to refueling the world's depleting energy resources. Target, Dr. Keo Marv, went missing after bioengineering a remarkable type of algae called oilix that made more gas for less green. With a stockpile of nuclear weapons, Marv's kidnappers held the entire world hostage. Snake's backup intel was provided by Campbell, survival trainer McDonnell Miller, mercenary strategist George Kassler, undercover CIA agent Holly White, Dr. Marv's bodyguard Natasha Markova, later changed to Gustava Hefner, and animal expert Josef Norden, who eventually became known as Johan Jacobsen. Each contact's face, along with Snake's, was shown during the transceiver conversations, making it easier to figure out who was talking. With twice the people to chat with, the dialogue options increased dramatically from the first official installment. Dr. Petrovich was added to the frequency call list after Snake learned he was again being held by Big Boss against his will, and a mysterious messenger calling himself Snake's #1 fan also offered advice. Sneaking around was much more challenging, as guards gained a 45-degree field of vision and the ability to turn their heads sideways or diagonally. Their patterns weren't limited to a single screen, and they would curiously follow intentional and unintentional noises made by the player. A second alert phase was added in between the original attack and patrol modes that meant even if Snake cleared the first rush of guards, the remaining forces would still be aware of his presence. Snake could still outsmart them by crawling through certain areas like fences, tanks, desks, and air ducts. A 3x3 grid on the right showed adjacent screen enemy locations, as well as mines once the detector was activated. Anyone who threw away the instruction manual felt a pang of regret when they discovered it could decipher tap codes and supply an additional frequency number. Rescuing hostages no longer increased rank. Instead, Snake would get more health and ammo capacity after defeating each boss. The numerous celebrity adversaries that surfaced in Zanzibar land had many of their names changed in subsequent translations. Black Color, who was incorrectly named after the Timothy Zahn novel Black Collar, was switched to Black Ninja. Ultra Vox, referencing the British band Ultra Vox, became the Four Horsemen, and the Predator, alluding to the Arnold Schwarzenegger film, is now known as Jungle Evil. The bosses Red Blaster and Running Man both still go by their original monikers. Black Color, or Ninja, turned out to be Schneider from the first Metal Gear, and now had a first name, Kyle. After being captured, tortured, drugged, and run through a secret NASA project, Kyle joined the organization he originally opposed. Drago Modnar also switched sides, joining the Metal Gear project willingly. After you discovered Dr. Marv had succumbed to extensive torture, Petrovich attacked, and Snake had to put him down. But the biggest betrayal occurred when Snake's #1 fan turned out to be Gray Fox, now piloting a souped-up Metal Gear D. Fox killed Gustava, and after retrieving the Oilix formula, Snake was forced to confront his old friend, buckled inside of his old nemesis. Destroying Metal Gear D caught Snake's supplies on fire, and he was left with only his 2 fists and martial arts experience to defeat Gray Fox in the middle of a live minefield. With Fox immobilized and Metal Gear D demolished, Big Boss challenged an unarmed Solid Snake. Snake proved once again that all you need to save the world is a pack of cigarettes and a lighter by fashioning a flamethrower with an aerosol can and torching Big Boss, this time for good. Holly delivered the Oilix formula to Roy Campbell, and Snake vanished into the wild for a second time. Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake usurped Snake's Revenge as the definitive follow-up to the MSX NES original, despite the game only being released in Japan. It was eventually ported to mobile phones in 2004 and finally landed stateside in 2006 as a part of Metal Gear Solid 3's subsistence. The character names were changed to their current versions, frequency numbers were saved in a memory window, and other adjustments were made to reflect the changes the series had undergone in the 16 years since MG2's original release. Whatever version gamers ended up playing, it was clear they were experiencing something different. Metal Gear proved the games didn't have to be rushed, and that level of patience was something fans would have to get used to in the sequels to follow. Join us next week as Metal Gear goes underground, only to resurface as one of the industry's most solid franchises. Leaving Zanzibar land for the outer reaches of space, Hideo Kojima wrote and directed the graphic adventure Policenauts in 1994. Advancing the point-and-click futuristic model he introduced in Snatcher, the game was originally released for the PC-98 and was quickly ported to the 3DO. While working on Panasonic's CD-based console, Kojima kept hearing incredible things about the brand new PlayStation. When he finally experienced the system's potential for himself, he went on high alert. In 1995, Kojima began developing a sequel to a series he hadn't touched in 5 years. Konami created their Computer Entertainment Japan division solely to supervise the project. The debugger for Policenauts, Yoji Shinkawa, designed the characters. This was a first for both Yoji and Solid Snake. Snake's first close-up on the MSX differed greatly from his two profiles in Metal Gear 2 based on actors Mel Gibson and Michael Madsen. Shinkawa regurgitated his own concept that removed the G.I. Joe Snake in favor of a darker, less saturated approach. The new model was added to the earlier games when they were re-released. The first gameplay of Metal Gear Solid lit up the Georgia Dome at E3 in 1997, following a concept video the year before. Other hot games featured at the event were Banjo-Kazooie, Star Fox 64, GoldenEye, Ocarina of Time, Symphony of the Night, and Final Fantasy VII. The 2-minute, 37-second trailer showcased pre-rendered characters, stealth, gun, and hand-to-hand combat, along with a brand new theme composed by Tappy Iwase. It brought new and old gamers together in a throng of anticipation. Japan waited a year to get Metal Gear Solid on June 12, 1998. The United States had to hold out for another 4 months. Six years after Zanzibar Land, in the strange, futuristic era of 2005, a new mission squashed Snake's plans of retirement by stuffing him in a submersible and firing him towards Shadow Moses Island. Southwest of Alaska's coastline, the base housing a nuclear disposal facility had recently been captured by rogue members of Snake and Campbell's former unit, Foxhound. The new group, composed of superhumans known as the Genome Army, threatened nuclear war and demanded the remains of Big Boss. After Foxhound's former leader, Liquid Snake, led his comrades to commit treason, Roy Campbell returned to service to command Solid Snake a second time. Campbell also brought on genetic scientist Naomi Hunter, radar and radio engineer Mei Ling, weapons analyst Natasha Romanenko, and old friend Master McDonald Miller. Other than stopping the terrorist plot, Snake also had to rescue Kenneth Baker, president of the fictional weapons manufacturer ArmsTech, and Donald Anderson, chief of the non-fictional Defense Advanced Projects Agency, or DARPA, formed after the Soviets launched Sputnik in 1957. Anderson told Snake about Metal Gear Rex, the most recent incarnation of the dreaded mech. Recruiting additional help while on the inside, Snake sought assistance from a regretful programmer named Hal Emmerich, aka Otacon, who switched sides when evidence arose that he was working for the bad guys, and Roy Campbell's daughter, Meryl Silverberg, who was trapped in the cell next to Anderson. The camera in Metal Gear Solid stayed close to the perspective demonstrated in Kojima's first two games in the series. Environments were viewed from a top-down angle, allowing the player to see places Snake couldn't. The revolution this time around was a corner cam that activated when Snake stuck himself to a wall, and a first-person vantage when surveying a room, hiding underneath objects, or spying through binoculars. With no adjacent screens to escape to, getting caught was best avoided at all costs. Soldiers would keep pouring in until Snake found cover long enough for a timer to run down. The grid radar system Snake beta tested in Metal Gear 2 became the Soliton radar system designed by Mei Ling. The upgraded scanner covered an entire room, labeled cameras and soldiers as different colors, and displayed the target's field of vision. PS1 hardware helped Kojima unhinge the camera for cutscenes run on the in-game engine. The technology produced hours of widescreen action few thought the PlayStation 1 was capable of, and drew the player into a never-before-seen cinematic journey. Snake's arrival on Shadow Moses, which served as a mini-tutorial, continued the opening credits over the player-controlled gameplay, setting up the experience as an interactive movie. The credits also introduced Metal Gear Solid's voice cast, a first for the franchise. In Japan, Snake was voiced by Akio Otsuka, who also verbalized the characters of Judge Cabranth in Final Fantasy XII, Ansem in Kingdom Hearts, and Xehanort in Kingdom Hearts 2. In the US, Snake was portrayed by David Hayter, an actor and screenwriter who penned the scripts for X-Men, X2, The Scorpion King, and The Watchmen.
Well, I know I won't be bored for the next 18 hours.
Again, a clan of unskippable bosses with catchy call signs stood to best Solid Snake, each overly confident in their abilities. Revolver Ocelot introduced Snake to his cult Peacemaker, but soon after had his right hand severed by a surprise combatant. Psycho Mantis took control of Meryl and eerily crept past the fourth wall by rumbling your DualShock controller and hacking into prior saves on your memory card. The freak show ended when Snake knocked Meryl unconscious and used infrared goggles to find Mantis in his adaptive camouflage suit. Sniper Wolf, the first female adversary in a Metal Gear game, severely injured Meryl, causing Snake to hastily rush her and get captured. After returning to the battlefield, Snake caught Wolf in his sights and put her out of her misery despite the passionate cries of an infatuated Otacon. Tank holding Vulcan Raven took a shot at Snake early on, and after the armored vehicle was destroyed, Raven returned with a Gatling gun. The last member of Liquid's team was unknowingly eliminated before any of these battles took place, when Master Mimic Decoy Octopus, posing as Donald Anderson, suffered a mysterious heart attack. cyborg ninja also appeared to wreak havoc on Shadow Moses, but neither side claimed responsibility for it. The operative dismembered Ocelot, sashimi'd a wave of genome soldiers, and fought Snake in front of Otacon. After a quick clash, Snake identified the cloaked assassin as Gray Fox, who presumably survived the incident at Zanzibar Land. He appeared to have no allegiance, but returned in the nick of time to turn the tide of the final battle.
Snake, have you ever heard of something called Fox Die?
Upon Master Miller's suggestion, Naomi Hunter was revealed as a spy. Prior to the mission, she injected Solid Snake with a manufactured virus called Fox Die, the biological weapon that killed Anderson and Baker after they had experienced prolonged exposure to its host. It was programmed to kill Snake as well. Further testing Snake's trust of others, Master Miller turned out to be Liquid Snake in disguise. Merrill had given Snake a PAL key to deactivate Metal Gear, but it ended up arming the nuclear device for launch. Liquid piloted the mobile launcher and seemed to be an unbeatable adversary when Gray Fox flipped in to even the odds. Ninja Fox disabled Metal Gear's radar, and Liquid exposed himself to visualize his target. Stamping Fox out like a bug, Metal Gear Rex turned to Solid Snake, who picked apart the monster with an assault of lock-on missiles. Liquid then stepped out of its burning carcass and squared off against Solid Snake, a wounded Merrill lying unconscious nearby.
You can't fight your genes, it's fate.
Liquid confessed to Snake that he was Solid's test tube brother, as both of them were attempts to clone Big Boss. Calling in for support, Snake was greeted by Secretary of Defense Jim Hausman, who had just arrested Roy Campbell and authorized a nuclear strike on Shadow Moses. After brawling with his chemical brother and proving himself the superior sibling, Snake and Merrill escaped through a tunnel in a jeep. With his heart still beating, Liquid pursued and amazingly gained the upper hand. Solid Snake was an easy target, but Fox Die confused the identical twins and crippled Liquid in the nick of time. Metal Gear Solid had two possible conclusions depending on whether you succumbed to Ocelot's torture or muscled through the pain. The alternate endings had you snowmobiling into the sunrise with either Otacon or Merrill. Campbell immediately called off the airstrike and officially declared that Solid Snake had been killed in action.
Live, Snake. It's all I can say to you.
Solid was the first Metal Gear game for many, but longtime fans that had played Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake noticed several remarkable similarities between the two games. So many, in fact, that some believe Solid to be a remake of the MSX2 sequel. Reoccurring themes included a rocket battle with a Hind D chopper, an ambush by 4 attackers in an elevator, making contact with a disguised female in the ladies' bathroom, changing an object's temperature to make it a functioning key, an unidentified fan of Snake contacting him via radio who eventually turns out to be Gray Fox, and an old ally disguised in armored ninja gear. Metal Gear Solid sold 350,000 copies in its first weekend, and over 6 million have been sold worldwide since its release. A few publications criticized its length and lack of difficulty, but it was tough for them to foresee the numerous copycat franchises the game would spawn, and since then, no best games list has ever excluded it. MGS received several perfect scores, the Excellence Award for Interactive Art at the Japanese Media Arts Festival in 1998, and is considered by many to be the greatest PlayStation action game in the console's history. Stealth fans wanted more of Kojima's duck and cover combat, and Konami rapidly dished out a massive content just over a year later. Metal Gear Solid Integral brought to Japanese players the content revised for the English port, along with the downloadable Pocket Station minigame and 300 VR missions, a continuation of training from the original. 3 months later, the tactical puzzles were released in America as VR missions. The simulations ranged from murder mysteries to confrontations with Godzilla-sized genome soldiers to test driving the cyborg ninja exoskeleton. VR also came packed with trailers for MGS and a photo shoot mode starring the artificially coy Naomi Hunter and Mei Ling. Reviews questioned its release as a standalone game and recommended it only for hungry fans. Even though Metal Gear Solid was widely hailed as a groundbreaking achievement, Hideo Kojima and his team felt the need to remake the title in 2004. While having lunch with his greatest influence, Shigeru Miyamoto, the Zelda creator urged Kojima to make a Metal Gear game for the GameCube. That was all it took to get the project running. Developed by Silicon Knights, the Twin Snakes was first shown off at E3 2003 and touted itself as featuring the best story of the 20th century blended with the best gameplay of the 21st. In reality, the Twin Snakes was the original story with some gameplay enhancements found in Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. Although Twin Snakes was created by Silicon Knights, its cutscenes were developed in-house at Konami and directed by Japanese film director Ryuhei Kitamura. Kitamura was widely known for his utilization of the bullet time effect, a trick excessively overdone since its breakthrough in the 1999 film The Matrix. Originally, Kitamura's vision was simply to stick as close to the original cinematics as possible, but when Kojima was shown the cuts, he rejected them and demanded they be redone to be more original. The end result was something to behold. Nearly every flaw was corrected, and the developers went above and beyond, pouring on the fan service. Prominent features, such as the ability to use first-person aiming, holding up enemies at gunpoint for dog tags, and the ability to hang over ledges and drop down to lower levels, were plucked from Metal Gear Solid 2. Other smaller refinements included adding first-person effects, such as the camera freezing over in cold exteriors, guards now calling for backup when Snake was spotted, being able to shoot out surveillance cameras with a gun, and not having to switch to a keycard when Snake needed to open a locked door. The creators also made sure to sprinkle in plenty of Easter eggs for returning soldiers. Instead of Mantis scanning a PlayStation memory card, he read the GameCube card and listed off several titles from the save data, including Super Smash Bros. Melee, Super Mario Sunshine, The Wind Waker, and Eternal Darkness. In the room where Snake rescues Otacon, several pieces of eye candy were thrown in, such as a Mario and Yoshi doll that had accompanying sound effects when shot, as well as a functional GameCube and Wavebird at one of the desks. Some of the magazines that could be used to distract the guards feature the main protagonist of Eternal Darkness, Alex Roivas. Of course, not all changes were for the best. None of the sample VR missions were included. During the battle with Gray Fox, there originally was a sequence that involved shooting the ninja to finish him off. In the Metal Gear Rex battle, missiles had the ability to lock onto Snake in the original, which was changed to make the fight a bit easier. Players who were new to the series could start off on the newly added very easy difficulty setting, and veterans who did not wish to endure the rather lengthy codec sessions could now quickly skip through them. Finally, almost all of the original score was rewritten, with the exception of the ending theme, The Best Is Yet to Come. Much of the dialogue was re-recorded for Twin Snakes, usually in a more dramatic and over-the-top approach, even by Metal Gear standards.
I'm just the leftovers of what they used to make you.
Gray Fox, as well as the DARPA chief Anderson, was originally voiced by Greg Eagles, but Rob Paulson took over in the GameCube version. Though this was the only cast member change, the voices of Mei, Naomi, and Natasha were altered to remove their accents. Some of the content was also updated to reflect the times, such as the ending statistics being accurate as of the year 2003 versus 1998. Reviews went both ways, with the negative comments comparing the features in Twin Snakes to those of the GameCube Resident Evil remake 2 years earlier. A radio drama of Metal Gear Solid ran for 18 episodes from 1998 to 1999 on Konami's radio channel called Club DB. While not attributed to canon, the series covered events following the incident on Shadow Moses Island by continuing the anti-terrorist exploits of Snake, Campbell, Merrill, and Mei Ling. MGS was also re-released with its sequels as a part of the Essential Collection in March of 2008. The impact of Metal Gear Solid is still being felt to this day, with its drastic advancements in voice acting, cutscenes, plot twists, stealth movement, inventive interactivity, and blockbuster action. Hideo Kojima had many achievements to be proud of, but his only PlayStation 1 project became the masterpiece that would fortify his persona as a video game auteur. Snake was dreaming of a third retirement, but Kojima was just getting started. Reprogram this frequency number next week as Metal Gear Solid 2 infiltrates the PlayStation 2. In this new generation, the rules of engagement change. Beloved heroes retreat into the shadows, and a military family is formed.
Destroy the final weapon.
The sequel to Metal Gear Solid began development before the original title reached the US. Kojima and his team started pre-planning for the introductory portion of MGS2, and internal videos circulated at Konami in the months immediately following. At the same time, Sony was busy polishing the PlayStation 2, and it was decided Snake's new mission would be launched on the updated console. Initially, concept work depicted characters using the now famous toon rendering technique, though in the end, the developers opted for a more realistic visual style. Finally, at E3 2000, the world got its first glimpse at the fourth official installment in the Solid franchise, Sons of Liberty. The nearly 8-minute-long trailer not only showcased hints of new gameplay footage as well as early details of the plot, but kickstarted a year-long hype frenzy. Trailer after trailer revealed more and more of the story and gameplay, and fans couldn't wait until the title's anticipated release sometime in the fall of 2001. To help ease the wait, a demo version of Sons of Liberty was included with another Kojima title, Zone of the Enders, when it was released in March. The demo contained just the beginning portion of the game. More trailers were shown at E3 and TGS, but Kojima tormented fans by submerging in the time leading up to the release, claiming no new info would surface until the game was about to come out. Sons of Liberty finally arrived in North America on November 14th, 2001, the very same day as the launch of the Xbox. It surfaced 2 weeks later in Japan.
Sons of Liberty took place in 2007, 2 years after the events of Shadow Moses. Snake, now teaming up with pal Otacon, joined the NGO group Philanthropy, an organization with an anti-Metal Gear initiative. After receiving an apparent tip from his long-lost sister Emma, Otacon learned that the Marine Corps' new Metal Gear Ray was being transported aboard the vessel Discovery, traveling along the Hudson River. Snake, using amazing aerobatics and a leap of faith off the George Washington Bridge, infiltrated the passing tanker. Soon after scoping the immediate area, a team of Russian soldiers carried by Kasatka, the Russian Kamov Ka-60, took control of the ship, sealing off the cargo hold with Metal Gear Ray and rigging the craft with explosives. The invading force was led by General Sergei Gurlukovich, the same Russian general that intended to purchase Metal Gear Rex from Liquid in MGS-1. Snake encountered Sergei's daughter, Olga, and the two engaged in a quick shootout. Snake knocked her out and moved below deck to the cargo holds where a horde of Marines and Ray stood waiting. Snake's objective was to photograph Ray and prove the Marines were involved. After snapping a few pics and uploading them to Otacon, Revolver Ocelot and Sergei captured the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Scott Dolph. Ocelot revealed that he had no intention of giving Ray to Gurlukovich, and the quick-draw specialist wiped them all out. Before Ocelot could escape, Snake confronted him, prompting a peculiar reaction from Ocelot's right arm. Seeking an amputee donor, Ocelot had surgically attached Liquid's appendage to his old wound, and it apparently possessed the ability to overtake Ocelot's mind. Ocelot blew the Discovery sky high, escaping with Ray. Snake was left behind with the sinking tanker and was presumed to be dead. Flashing forward 2 years, players were unexpectedly, and by many fans' accounts disappointingly, put in control of an operative known as Raiden. The brand new soldier's objective was to infiltrate the offshore cleanup facility Big Shell and rescue the President of the United States from a terrorist group known as Dead Cell. Raiden's support team consisted of former Foxhound Commander Colonel Roy Campbell, as well as Raiden's girlfriend, Rose. The terrorists demanded $30 billion and were being led by a man calling himself Solid Snake. As Raiden gradually made his way through the complex, he was quickly introduced to 2 members of Dead Cell. Vamp, with a taste for blood, superhuman speed and agility, and the ability to survive mortal wounds. And Fortune, the daughter of Scott Dolph, who apparently couldn't be hit by any weapon or attack. During the encounter with Vamp, Raiden met up with SEAL Lieutenant Junior Grade Iroquois Pliskin, who looked remarkably familiar. The pseudonym was a reference to the character that originally inspired Solid's name, Snake Plissken, from John Carpenter's Escape from New York. Pliskin and Raiden eventually teamed up with demolition expert Peter Stillman in order to defuse a series of explosives set up by Dead Cell member Fat Man, a former pupil of Stillman's. Though the team was successful in stopping the plot, the act triggered the countdown for the real bombs. Raiden stopped one of them, but Stillman failed and was killed.
I wanted to wield the power of a king instead of being an expendable pawn.
With the help of a third cyborg ninja named Mr. X and DIA operative Richard Ames, Raiden finally located President James Johnson. Johnson told Raiden that everything he knew about the mission, as well as the nation, was a sham. The president was a willful participant in the terrorist activities in hopes that he could bargain his way into becoming a member of the Patriots, an omnipresent organization that apparently ruled the United States of America. The leader of Dead Cell, another clone of Big Boss, known as Solidus Snake, was the former president during the events of Shadow Moses, George Sears.
By deleting such information, the Patriots can shape the course of history as they see fit.
The entire Big Shell facility was a ruse for the new Metal Gear project, Arsenal Gear. Raiden was instructed to give a disc containing a virus to Emma Emmerich and to end the president's life. Raiden refused, but Ocelot killed the president and let Raiden go free. Raiden successfully made it to Emma, but not before a fateful encounter with Dead Cell member Vamp. Emma was rushed to the entrance of Arsenal Gear and uploaded the virus before passing away in front of her brother. Pliskin, who had gradually been revealed as Solid Snake, asked Otacon to fly the hostages to safety. Raiden and Snake prepared to enter Arsenal Gear when Mr. X appeared and revealed herself to be Olga. Snake apparently switched sides, and Olga knocked Raiden unconscious. Raiden awoke in a chamber much like the one on Shadow Moses and planned an escape. While fleeing the compound, both Rose and the Colonel began to act strangely, with the Colonel asking Raiden to reset the game.
Honestly, though, you have played the game for a long time. Don't you have anything else to do with your time?
Eventually, Snake and Raiden were reunited, and Snake revealed he had to use Raiden to gain entry into Arsenal. The two moved forward and encountered Fortune. Snake stayed behind and allowed Raiden to move ahead, where he confronted Solidus and a horde of Metal Gear Ray units. Solidus was about to kill Raiden when Olga intervened and saved his life. She revealed her daughter was being held by the Patriots, and if Raiden died, so too would her child. Solidus killed Olga and ordered the Ray units to strike. Raiden dismantled the hordes of Rays, and eventually the virus Emma uploaded kicked in. Arsenal Gear was thrown into a state of chaos and began a crash course for New York City. Atop Arsenal Gear, Solidus and the members of Dead Cell held Snake and Raiden hostage. Just when Snake, Raiden, and the player seemed to have everything sorted out, Ocelot dropped the bomb that all that had occurred was the will of the Patriots. Shocked and in disbelief, Fortune attempted to kill Ocelot, only to feel his bullet strike her in the chest. Even her good luck was a gift from the Patriots, and the result of their technology. Ocelot, under the control of Liquid's arm, commandeered the last Metal Gear Ray and prepared to kill everyone else. But Fortune shielded the group from the attack. Liquid escaped with Ray, Solid gave chase, and Arsenal Gear crashed into Manhattan, throwing Solidus and Raiden atop the Federal Reserve Building. The two then fought an epic sword battle, ending in Raiden killing Solidus by sending him over the edge. Raiden then reunited with Rose and desired to track down the Patriots, but Snake felt Raiden needed to figure some things out before he could help the cause. Sons of Liberty contained the same essential gameplay made popular in MGS1, though several tweaks were added, as well as new features made possible by the power of the PlayStation 2. Players could now use their weapons in first-person mode, which was combined with the new system that allowed players to hold enemy units up at gunpoint. They could then wait to collect a hidden dog tag, knock them out, or grab them and use them as a human shield. Snake could no longer leave bodies lying around in the open, as other guards would see it and send in backup. If you let a knocked out enemy regain consciousness, that unit would also call in for help. Backup troops would sweep the area in the new caution mode, and even hiding in a box sometimes would not suffice. When the player was outright spotted, units would work to cut off any escape routes and order additional forces, typically carrying protective shields and heavier firepower. Snake or Raiden would need to find a safe place to hide or take out the immediate soldiers in the area in order to exit the alert mode. The game would then enter caution mode, thus enforcing a higher penalty on players who were discovered and reinforcing the notion of stealth gameplay. At points, even Snake's shadow was detectable by enemy guards. The attention to detail was also second to none at the time, filled with tons of visual eye candy. players could go into a full-service bar and shatter every single one of the glasses, each leaking their own unique contents. In a pantry shootout, watermelons would explode and bags of flour would pour onto the floor. The player could even shoot out a huge piece of glass in the early part of the tanker, bit by bit, until it shattered into thousands of pieces. There was nothing on par with switching out controller ports, but Sons of Liberty had its fair share of epic boss battles. In the shootout with Olga, players had to deal with not only the rain affecting their vision, but Olga could use a spotlight to blind Snake or loosen a tarp to provide cover. Of course, Snake could use his own weapons to counter these measures. Fat Man skated around the top of a helipad, planting explosives that had to be defused while still trying to take him out. Fortune was the only boss encounter that players could not overcome, requiring them to simply take cover and dodge her shots. Vamp danced across water and walls while displaying his fancy knife work. Instead of taking on a Hind-D helicopter, players had to eliminate a Harrier jet. Of course, Snake and Raiden had loads of firepower at their disposal to help them tackle each villain. MGS2 introduced the Tranquilizer Gun, allowing players to complete the entire game without forcefully killing a single person, along with a razor-sharp katana and cooling spray. Players could hang over ledges to avoid discovery, though they were limited by their grip gauge. The gauge could be leveled up by performing 100 pull-ups. Completing Sons of Liberty resulted in a statistical breakdown of your performance, as well as the assigning of a code name based on certain factors. While the original merely displayed such results, Sons of Liberty provided an additional code that players could input on the official MGS2 website to enter into a worldwide ranking system. The feature premiered in the trial build and drew an overwhelming reception. The rankings updated weekly until they were eventually taken offline. Another noteworthy element of Sons of Liberty was its soundtrack. The original featured an impressive score, but Kojima upped the ante by bringing on Harry Gregson Williams, who had worked on such titles as Shrek, Chicken Run, and The Replacement Killers, to compose much of the soundtrack for Sons of Liberty, along with Norihiko Hibino, who had worked previously on Metal Gear Ghost Babel. Rika Muranaka, who composed and arranged The Best Is Yet to Come, returned to provide the ending theme, Can't Say Goodbye to Yesterday. Unfortunately, the events of September 11th forced Kojima and Konami to make some tough decisions very close to the release of MGS2. Before its launch, it was known that Sons of Liberty took place in New York City and featured terrorist activities. A sequence depicting Arsenal Gear's displacement of the Statue of Liberty and crashing through half of Manhattan was taken out, as was a breaking newscast after the credits showing the Statue of Liberty's new resting place, Ellis Island. Additionally, American flags, which were supposed to be on all the flagpoles in New York, were removed, including the one Raiden was supposed to cut down to cover Solidus's dead body. Similar to the Integral package following Metal Gear Solid, Konami compiled an expanded collection that marked the debut of the franchise on Microsoft's console. Metal Gear Solid 2 Substance was released in 2002. It was initially an exclusive for the Xbox, with PlayStation 2 and PC users having to wait until March of the following year. However, only the PlayStation 2 version contained every single feature, including a skateboarding mode based on the Evolution skateboarding engine. Substance still featured the same single-player campaign with some minor changes. In addition to the solo operation, boss survival and casting theater modes were added, as well as nearly 500 standalone missions. While the majority of these were akin to the VR missions in the original title, some of the extras allowed players to take the reins of Snake or Raiden in various scenarios throughout the tanker and big shell areas. Completing these missions unlocked various alternate outfits. Perhaps the biggest bonus, however, was the inclusion of 5 plot-based storylines titled Snake Tales. The mode essentially amounted to another single-player campaign, with players taking control of Solid Snake in various alternate scenarios set in the world of Sons of Liberty. The stories ranged from rather mild tales like stopping an insurrection by Fat Man and helping Otacon's sister Emma thwart a drug cartel, to a diabolical boss battle between Snake and Meryl, and the wildly incomprehensible task of taking down a gigantic enemy soldier dubbed Gurlagon in order to stop Solidus from taking over alternate realities. Sadly, these missions lacked proper production value and opted to use text to advance the narrative rather than the traditional cutscenes with voice work. MGS2 enjoyed an immense following after its release and further expanded the popularity of the franchise. Kojima's team put together the document of Metal Gear Solid 2, a complete lexicon and making-of feature that showcased not only how the creators put together the title, but included raw footage, artwork, models, and documentation that gave players a deeper insight into the inner workings of the development process. Sons of Liberty was released to incredible hype and has sold over 7 million copies to date. Reception was mostly positive, though critics and fans alike voiced several complaints. The most prominent issue raised was that the majority of the game was played as the new character Raiden, instead of series icon Solid Snake. This was exacerbated by fans who realized that early trailers released for the game showed Snake playable in the Big Shell section. Another sore point was the length of the cutscenes and codec conversations, with some segments featuring only a few minutes of gameplay, sandwiched between upwards of an hour of story development. The plot of the game also became quite convoluted in the final segments, with extensive delving into conspiracy theories, artificial intelligence, and social control. Despite these gripes, Sons of Liberty remains one of the finest pieces of cinematic gaming on the PlayStation 2. The game took some serious risks on a new platform, and divulged a story that fans are still wrapping their heads around. It was also the first Metal Gear game to have a Hideo Kojima production displayed on the front cover, making the developer a household name to gamers worldwide. Turn back the clock next week as we retreat to the beginning of the conflict. He may have been the ultimate enemy, but Big Boss was also the original hero.